Welcome back to Morning Joe. It is 32 past the hour. A live look at Washington, D.C. as the sun has yet to come up over the Capitol. Sources in the White House and on Capitol Hill tell NBC News that Democrats hope to have an economic relief bill. Yes.
Isn't it? Are you still having a hard time getting adjusted to sources in the White House?
Yes.
Not being like a caddy or something, because you hear sources in the White House and you like flinch.
I know.
You're like, wait, is this a caddy? Is this a white nationalist? And so when you hear it's still kind of strange, still kind of getting adjusted to the fact that sources in the White House, whether it was from a Republican administration in the past or a Democratic administration in the past, actually are probably people who have spent their lives trying to understand how to make this country better through government. So you say sources in the White House.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us still flinch.
I flinch when I say
And then I go, oh, wait a second. You actually have people there who are intelligent enough that they can do their job and communicate to the Hill with Republicans, people in the other party, and actually try to get things done. Anyway.
And they're not in emotion mind because they're gripped with fear every second of the day as to what might happen on Twitter. That's because when you're in that place in your brain where you're scared, it's hard to think. So you're not a good source.
Not just they don't want for a boss that watches cable news 11 hours a day.
Anyhow, they say they hope Democrats
by the way.
hope to have an economic relief bill passed by March 14th, the day that extended unemployment benefits will run out for millions of Americans. President Biden hopes to get more Republicans on board, but a senior White House official says it seems increasingly likely that Democrats will use reconciliation to pass the bill without Republican support. Key Democratic Senator Joe Manchin helped lay the groundwork for that yesterday, voting with his party to proceed to a budget resolution. However, he also warned that he wants the final bill to be targeted to those who most need relief. Manchin also came out against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is included in the Biden plan, telling reporters that he's supportive of something that's, quote, responsible and reasonable, like $11 an hour. Senator Manchin will be our guest later this morning. The Washington Post reports that on a call with Senate Democrats yesterday, President Biden urged them to, quote, go big on his nearly $2 trillion stimulus proposal. That's a day after he met with Senate Republicans on their much smaller plan.
Jonathan Lemire, what's your reporting on this?
Well, first of all, I'll say that, yes, it is an adjustment when dealing with White House sources, and certainly communications with the White House have far fewer exclamation points these days, so sort of wrap my head around that as well. What we're hearing here is, I believe, a growing momentum that as much as the president is interested in some sort of bipartisan solution, Joe, the sense is this is likely going to have to be the Democrats going it alone. Now, 1.9 trillion is certainly a huge number, and there's a sense that perhaps the White House may be willing to come down on that sum. But the 600 billion the Republicans floated in that Monday meeting is just a non-starter, as one senior White House person put it to me. It was sort of laughably small. Now, it doesn't mean there can't be some common ground, but the Republicans are going to have to give a lot more than that. And Manchin's not alone in floating the idea that some of the relief should be more targeted to Americans who really need it. But yet there's some in the White House who are baffled that Republicans seem to be opposing these direct payments, which were so politically popular. And they point to Georgia, those two Senate races that have had so many ramifications. But Warnock and Ossoff's campaigns both say that at the time it was a $2,000 direct check, that was such a winning issue. And the Democrats are surprised that Republicans don't want to stand up for that. So we got some time here still, but there is, of course, an urgency from the White House to get some sort of constructive path going here, but there is a belief that reconciliation may end up having to be the final solution, that the Republicans simply won't get on board in a meaningful way to make this bipartisan.
Well, Claire, even if there is reconciliation, Republicans obviously can still vote for it in the end, and there are examples in the past where reconciliation has been used as an approach, and you've had 60, 70 members of the Senate vote for legislation. I think, though, Democrats in the White House are focused so much, and have been focused so much, on Republicans and what they're not going to do with the Republicans that maybe they've overlooked until yesterday. Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, perhaps Senator Hickenlooper, others who are going to hear from constituents that they want targeted relief and that they don't think the bill needs to be close to $2 trillion. That maybe 1.4, 1.5 trillion may be a little more reasonable. I mean, they've got to get to 50 votes, and to get to 50 votes, they're going to have to convince some conservative to moderate Democrats in their own caucus.
So far, this White House has been very smart because they have been focused on policies that are widely popular, that have wide bipartisan support in this country. The president's COVID plan in a poll yesterday morning was supported by more than 2/3 of Americans. So when you have that kind of policy that's so popular, it makes it easier to not focus on whether or not you have politicians that are bipartisan supporting it. I actually think, though, Joe, you're right. I think they end up with getting all of the Democrats for this program. And if they get all of the Democrats, they'll get a few Republicans, too. They'll end up having it bipartisan because if some of the more moderate Democrats are for the package, if it becomes more targeted, if they, phase in the minimum wage over a slightly longer period of time, I mean, those are the kinds of things that they'll talk about. I think they'll not only get the Manchins and the Sinemas and the other moderates in the Democratic caucus, they'll also get a handful of the Republicans that know this is something that's really popular where they live.
Let's bring Sam Stein into the conversation. He's the White House editor for Politico. Sam, good morning. So President Biden has said all the right things. He held that meeting in the Oval Office 2 nights ago with the 10 Republicans, signaling at least that he's open to some debate and negotiation here. But boy, if you listen to Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats, they say we're ready to go. We'll go with reconciliation if you're not on board with this $1.9 trillion plan. We're just going without you. We gave you a chance to get on board, but the train's leaving now. Do you see any room in here for negotiation? What would Democrats give, perhaps?
First off, are we just going to ignore Claire's MacGyver Chiefs flag in the backdrop and that delicious-looking cake? I mean, that is
Super Bowl's getting close, Sam.
I can't compete with that backdrop. It's impossible.
Thank you for finally noticing. I thought that Joe would give me trouble with it at the top of the hour, but go Chiefs.
It was so subtle, Claire. We didn't notice.
In there. Yeah, it's the way the flag's pinned in there by the cabinet. I almost forgot your question. Hold on. Yes. Okay. So what is Joe Biden thinking here? I think, look, here's the deal. The vantage point in the White House is what Jonathan was saying, which is they're going to get 50 votes. They might have to come down from the total price tag of $1.9 trillion. They may have to reduce the minimum wage from, a $15 an hour raise to, 11 or 12, but they're going to get 50 votes. And the question is whether any Republicans will recognize that this train is leaving the station and that they should offer their votes, which are immaterial at some point, in exchange for taking the political benefits of getting $1,400 checks to a lot of families. It's not going to be every family. They're going to have a cap at some point on income who gets it. They'll phase it out. But do Republicans want to be part of this process where people are going to get money in their pockets? And that's a huge political winner. Everyone knows that from Georgia. The question is, do Republicans want to be part of it? So, in some ways, we're going through a little bit of a show here about, how much is he reaching out to Republicans? Will he entertain their ideas? But they've been very clear at the White House that what was happening with Republicans on Monday was a talk, not a negotiation. They wanted to hear out their proposal. They wanted to entertain their ideas, but they weren't necessarily going to move off of their plan just because 10 Republicans showed up. And here's the key. It's not just that they can get 1 or 2 or 3 Republicans. If they are going to negotiate, they need to get 10 unless they do it through reconciliation. And so the question is, do you stick with a huge plan, which is politically popular, or do you negotiate off of it just for the sake that you may, in fact, get 10 Republicans? And there's no one I've talked to in Democratic circles who thinks that it's wise to move off this plan, when it's so politically popular, when you can get political benefits. In addition to the policy benefits, one last thing, I know I'll shut up after this. They don't want to have to do this again in 3 months' time. They want to go big precisely because they think it will help the economy. They don't want to have to be back at the negotiating table in the summer because they didn't do enough the first go-around.
Jason Johnson, we got your tech issues worked out. So is there any value in in doing a deal with getting 10 Republicans? I mean, if you had to make an argument for the value of that, what would it be?
I mean, the value is that you can claim, I guess, if it's going to make Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema feel better, that you actually involve Republicans. I think it's ridiculous. You have a mandate for a reason. Joe Biden doesn't just, the Democrats don't just have a mandate, but they have a very special, specific mandate because after the election is over, the people in the state of Georgia, which was ostensibly a red state until 15 weeks ago, said, yeah, we want to make sure that Democrats can go big and go bold. So I don't see why any of the Republicans' concerns need to make a difference at all under any circumstances. They don't negotiate in good faith. But I'll also say this, and I think it's a ridiculous argument on the part of Manchin and Sinema and anybody else, any other sort of conservative Democrats. What could be more targeted than $2 grand a month to families that need it? That's as targeted as you need. People are hurting across this country. And the idea of slicing and dicing because you've got one group of people in the suburbs or one group of people in the country who want to make some other group of people not get money they don't deserve, it's that sort of selfishness, both in policy and attitude, that has left this country in the damaged position we're in economically during this COVID crisis. So, you know, Manchin can talk all he wants about this. I don't think that is helpful for our body politic, and the Democrats need to do this in reconciliation and keep moving because Mitch McConnell, the train is already gone. They're already on Amazon. They're already on, you know, eBay trying to find other tickets because there's no way they'll catch up with what the Democrats need to get done.
So, Jason, you heard a lot of the stories from the first big COVID bill of people who made hundreds of thousands of dollars getting relief, other people who needed the relief being shut out. What is the damage in trying to make a package more targeted so people who don't need the money don't get the money and people who do need the money do get the money? I mean, you know, and of course we understand that's going to happen in any bill that's 1.5 trillion to 2 trillion. There are going to be horror stories about people who have private jets. And we heard Stephanie Ruhle tell a lot of these horror stories. People who had private jets, people who had yachts, they got money from the federal government that was intended for, you know, people who were truly disadvantaged. It does seem like, wouldn't it be a good idea to really drill down here and make sure that this relief is targeted?
Yes, but Joe, I think the issue here is, yes, we can talk about Kushner and Ivanka and Kanye West and Tom Brady, hope the Bucks lose. We can talk about the wealthy people who managed to get money last year, right, who didn't get it. We can also talk about the fact that large numbers of minority businesses got almost no money out of the previous package. But I also think that that was a result of Republicans in the Senate and that current administration, that they weren't paying attention to how the money was being distributed, that they didn't cross all the T's and dot the I's. I don't have as much of a concern in this administration about that level of graft as I do in the last one. And I also think, quite frankly, that, look, you know, Ossoff and Warnock owe their positions to telling their constituents $2,000 checks are coming. If you want to show that you are a party of strength, or if you want to show that you are strong and bold in your agenda, as the previous administration was, you don't start off by cheating people. You start off by giving people exactly what was promised in the two most important seats that you just got that allowed you to have your majority. So, again, I don't think if you want to argue about minimum wage, $15 versus $11, obviously those are people who haven't had to live on a minimum wage anytime recently, but I don't think that any compromise on the flat dollar amount and the desperate need that families have for it, I don't think that that should be caught up out of some concern that some celebrity is going to get some extra cash, because there's some people out there, regular people, who every single week, every single month that this is delayed over ideological reasons, they're suffering, they're getting kicked out of their homes, they're starving, and they're in positions that they shouldn't be in.
Sam Stein, you've got to look at some Politico Morning Consult polls on how President Biden is doing. Give us a sense of what you found.
Well, I know I'm supposed to tout these polls as revelatory and big newsy polls, but they're not. They're pretty boring, actually. It's the standard stuff Biden is doing.
What a company man
Biden is
you
doing.
are.
Yeah, good job.
Well, you know, it's sort of like reverse, you know, well, I'm trying to reverse engineer interest in it by downplaying it. But anyways, Biden is doing fairly well. I mean, he's up at 58% approval rating, which is where he's been in a lot of these polls. It's a shocking contrast, of course, to Donald Trump, who never broke 50% in these polls. People think he's doing fairly decently on the handling of the economy. There's some general appetite for him to work more with Congress, but it's not overwhelmingly so. It looks to me through these numbers that there is an imperative for him to get the economic issue right more than there is to work with Congress. Now, people on the right track, wrong track number, they generally think the country is going in the wrong track, but it's not as bad as it was under Trump. And that's primarily, I guess, because Democrats have gotten more optimistic. It's sort of what happens when your party takes over power. You suddenly feel better about the direction of the country. So you look at these numbers and you say, yeah, these are pretty good numbers for Joe Biden. And they're certainly good numbers if he wants to sell this bill to the American public. It says, the polls say he's popular. He has an imperative to work on the economy, and people trust him. So overall, fairly bland, but interesting and important numbers for Biden.
Well, I'll take bland. I like bland.
Well, actually,
bland is good.
If you're looking at numbers in the high 50s, that actually is fairly extraordinary. In these times, you don't usually have presidents in the high 50s. Unless we're at war or have been attacked. But I wonder how much of that is simply because things have gotten more quiet in Washington, D.C. There was just the daily
deluge.
Actually, hourly.
Yeah.
Deluge of chaos and tweets and breaking news and insults.
A fire hose for 4 years.
I wonder how much of these numbers are just people saying, yeah, you know what? I like a return to normalcy. I like being able to have dinner and sit around dinner and not talk about politics. I'd like to be able to talk about other things. There was just this all-consuming conversation going on that even exhausted some of Donald Trump's fiercest supporters.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. How many times have you heard people say in the last couple of weeks, it's nice not to hear from the president? We heard from the president every minute of every day, and if it was quiet, he'd make sure to fill that space with something, anything, a conspiracy theory, a threat, a taunt. And I think people are settling into some normalcy, as you say. But the fact remains, those numbers on right track, wrong track weren't going to flip overnight with the election of Joe Biden. We're in the middle of a terrible public health crisis.
Terrible time.
We're still dealing with there's the right direction, 43%. We're also dealing with the fallout from January 6th that remains and what it revealed about our country and what Congress is going to do about it. So I think with the economic pain that has come with the public health crisis, and there still is that chaos and the residue of the chaos in Washington, you're not going to see a right track number up in the high 50s flip like that for some time.
All right, Jason Johnson, since we got your tech going here, we're asking all of our guests who they want to profile, recognize for Black History Month. Who do you choose?
I choose a little-known but amazing figure in American history, General David Fagan. Now, basically imagine a Filipino and African-American version of Dances with Wolves. Fagan was born just about 10, 12 years after slavery in 1875 in Tampa, Florida. He joined the military, where, of course, it was segregated and African-American officers were abused, not just by their generals, but also often by their superiors. And he fought in the American-Filipino War in 1899. Well, after seeing the abuses of the Imperial United States, who basically betrayed the Filipinos and began to attack them, he switched sides and became a rebel leader for the Filipinos and became one of the most powerful and influential military minds in the world at that particular point, taking out American soldiers, taking out American armaments, and protecting the indigenous population that had been betrayed by the United States. The U.S. was so concerned about him that they put out a bounty. They could not catch him because he was so sophisticated and had gained so much knowledge of the local terrain that they were never able to capture him. Eventually, after 2 years of a serious search, someone claimed to have caught David Fagan by going to the U.S. generals and providing beheading a sort of decomposed severed head, claiming it was him. But 2 years later, he was still leading indigenous revolts, indigenous resistance, married a local woman, and went and basically lived the rest of his life in relative peace in the Philippines. So I think it's not just an example of an American hero, but it's also an example of African Americans recognizing that we often have solidarity with other abused people on this planet and our need to sort of resist imperialism in the face of white supremacy and violence.